Why does losing weight get harder over time? Hi, I'm Layne Norton, co-founder of Carbon Diet Coach and PhD in nutritional sciences, and I've coached over 2,000 people during the course of my career one-on-one and have practical in-the-trenches experience with this, as well as understanding the scientific literature. So anyone who's done a weight loss diet for any period of time knows that whatever calories you start out with, you typically don't just lose weight linearly until the end of time, until you're a emaciated corpse. Weight loss slows down and typically eventually stalls even when you start out in what's a calorie deficit. And this causes a lot of people to be confused and say things like, well, I ate in a calorie deficit and it didn't work for me. No, you ate in what was a calorie deficit or what should have been a calorie deficit, but if you didn't lose weight, it wasn't a calorie deficit. Now, how can this happen? Well, we have two sides to an equation, which is energy in, calories in, versus total daily energy expenditure, calories out. And if you consume less calories than you expend, you'll lose weight. But a lot of people have the impression that this is a very static equation. And the reality is both sides of this equation move. As you reduce your calorie intake and begin to lose weight, several things start to happen. The first is you can have a decrease in your basal metabolic rate. Now, your basal metabolic rate is basically the cost of keeping the lights on. So if I just had you lay down and just breathe, your basal metabolic rate is what you burn over a 24-hour period doing no activity. And so for most people, this is actually about 50 to 70% of their total daily energy expenditure or total calories out. Then you have what's called your physical activity. And this encompasses two buckets: your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and your exercise activity, which is what it sounds like, how much exercise you do. NEAT is non-purposeful movements like fidgeting, postural energy, and can actually contribute to a significant amount of your energy expenditure per day. And this is also modifiable during a weight loss diet. So how much? Well, we know that 10% weight loss can cause approximately a 15% reduction on average in your basal metabolic rate. We also know a 10% reduction in body weight can cause a 400 calorie reduction in your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So let's use an example. Let's take myself, for instance. I maintain my current body weight about 205 pounds on approximately 3,400 calories per day. If I go down to 2,700 calories per day, that's about a 700 calorie deficit for me. That's a pretty decent sized deficit. But over time, I will lose weight. And let's say I lose 10% of my body weight over time. If my BMR gets reduced by 15%, my BMR is around 2,000 calories per day. That's a 300 calorie reduction per day. And if my NEAT goes down by 400 calories a day, 300 plus 400 is 700 calories. So if you take 3,400, my original maintenance calories, and you subtract 700, you get 2,700, which was my original calorie deficit. So what started as a calorie deficit, if I lose 10% of my body weight, actually ends up my new maintenance calories. Now, this isn't something that just happens like instantaneously, or there's not like a tipping point where you reach a certain weight. This happens progressively over time. Additionally, weight loss becomes harder the more weight you lose because your appetite signals become more and more sensitive, meaning you feel hungrier the longer you diet, the more weight you lose. When you consider that adipocytes, or your fat cells, are like sponges, and so essentially they expand or shrink in size depending on how much fat is being pushed into them or pushed out of them. So in the case of a calorie deficit, you're pushing fat out because you have to create energy to fill that calorie deficit. In the case of a calorie surplus, you're pushing energy into the fat cells to store it. So when fat cells shrink, they actually send out signals telling your brain to be hungrier. When they expand, they send out signals telling you to be less hungry, but there tends to be more regulation on the lower end of things, meaning you can kind of eat past those satiety signals if your fat cells are expanding, but when they're shrinking, that effect becomes very pronounced. It makes sense if you think about, from a survival perspective, 10,000 years ago, the risk of starvation was much greater than the risk of predation, meaning the appetite regulating signals that would prevent you from becoming too fat would be because it'd be easier for you to get eaten by something because you can't run away as well. And sure, that's a risk, but it's a much lower risk over the course of humanity's existence than starving to death, which is a very, very real risk up until, say, I don't know, the last 100 years or so. And so this has been ingrained into our genetics, our DNA, and it makes it so that the more weight you lose, the more difficult it is to lose more weight after that. Because calorie restriction is kind of sensed like controlled starvation. While it's not starvation, your body, your endocrine system, and your brain are going to respond by trying to drive you back to your previous body weight because that is safer. So those are some of the ways in which your body fights losing more weight. So how do we combat this? Choosing very filling foods, high fiber, high satiety foods, minimally processed, and by understanding that your energy expenditure can change over time. A lot of coaches don't understand this. A lot of apps don't understand this, but Carbon Diet Coach understands this. And by tracking your energy expenditure, and it does that through looking at how your weight changes versus how many calories you're taking in, and based on our custom algorithm, can determine with really good accuracy what your maintenance calories or total daily energy expenditure is. Carbon can make adjustments to get in front of these decreases in total daily energy expenditure so you don't have to worry about it. It's going to adjust your nutrition automatically for you. So if you're interested in Carbon Diet Coach, you can follow them here on Instagram, click the link in their description, or click the link in my description and download and subscribe today.